Morning. This lecture video is going to go over the structures that are involved with the skin and the integumentary system. So this is going to include the structures of skin, hair, and nails. Alright, so let's start with the skin. The skin is made up of three different layers: the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. So you can see on this slide, or this histogram here, the epidermis is the outermost layer, the top layer. So when you look at each other, at the person next to you, you're looking at their epidermis, and it's a very thin layer. And then the dermis, which is the thick layer of the skin, and then the hypodermis, which is down below, which some scientists believe is actually a part of the skin. Some think it's its own layer that's not a part of the skin, but whatever, it's an important structure in terms of anchoring the skin to the structures that lie underneath. So we're going to start with the epidermis. So in this diagram here, the epidermis is this thin top layer. Like I said, it's the outermost layer. It's the layer that you look at. It's actually further divided into four to five sublayers, depending on where in the body we're talking about. So thin skin versus thick skin. The very top layer is called the stratum corneum, and the very bottom layer is called the stratum basale, or the basal layer. Inside of this epidermis contains special cells called melanocytes. Melanocytes are responsible for producing melanin, and melanin is what gives us our skin color. So if we have a darker complected skin, our melanocytes produce more melanin than someone who has a lighter complected skin. We all have about the same number of melanocytes, interestingly enough, so it doesn't matter what color your skin is or what shade your skin is. We all have the same number of these cells. It's just that those of us with a darker complexion, our cells produce more melanin naturally. So again, here's just showing you the epidermis, these layers blown up, and you can again see this bottom layer here is that stratum basale, and then up here is that stratum corneum, so this top uppermost layer and then this bottommost layer. Here is showing you a picture of a melanocyte. Melanocytes can be activated by the environment, so when you're sitting out in the sun and the UV radiation hits your skin, that radiation will tell your skin essentially that it's being damaged, and those melanocytes will respond by producing melanin, and that melanin kind of forms a protective barrier against the deeper parts of your skin. So that's why when you are out in the sun, your skin typically that's what a tan is. A tan is an indication that your body recognized that radiation might be damaging it, and your melanocytes were activated to produce more melanin. Sometimes if you're very fair complected skin, these cells can be activated, but they just can't produce enough melanin to actually keep up. And what happens then is that it can't keep up, and so the skin actually gets a physical burn, and that's what a sunburn is. So even though we all like to look tan, really a tan indicates that we were starting to potentially damage our cells. The next layer, so layer B then, is the dermis. That's the very thick layer. The dermis layer is going to have all kinds of structures that are embedded within it: your hair follicle, different kinds of glands, nerve cells, and a blood supply. So that epidermis, that top layer, doesn't have any blood supply or any nerve supply to it, but when we get into the dermis layer, we do have blood and nerve supply. So if we're looking at this picture then, you can kind of see here the hair follicle, which is number 8. This is the opening in the dermis that holds your hair. The hair bulb is number 7. It's the bottom of your hair. And the hair root is any part of the hair that is below the surface. Okay? And then the hair shaft is any part of your hair that is above the surface, so the hair that we can see. We'll talk a little bit more about the parts of a hair strand in just a second, but number 4, structure 4, is showing your sebaceous glands. Sebaceous glands produce a chemical called sebum, and its job is to kind of waterproof your hair and skin. Usually it's located right next to the hair follicle, so that's one way of knowing what that is. Also next to the hair follicle is structure number 6, which is called the erector pili muscle. This is going to be responsible for producing your goosebumps. Number 3 is a sweat gland. So you can look at this structure right here. We have two different kinds of sweat glands, eccrine glands and apocrine glands. Eccrine glands produce sweat like what we think of as sweat, salty stuff when we start to get overheated. Apocrine glands produce a substance that leads to body odor, so we don't want to activate our apocrine glands. Dermal blood vessels is showing number 5. So again, just this idea that your dermis has a blood supply to it, also a nerve supply. And then also embedded within here are going to be sensory receptors. They're not really drawn in, but our ability to kind of feel things and touch things will all be determined by receptors that are located in this dermis layer. And then letter C, which is right here, this is going to be the hypodermis. So, and the hypodermis is mainly going to be adipose or fat, and its job is to, again, kind of anchor our skin, and then also plays an important role in insulation and temperature regulation, and also protection. So that would be layer C. Here's the diagram or model that's showing it. Here's the hair shaft. Number 2 is a sebaceous gland. Number 3 is a hair follicle. Number 4 is the erector pillae muscle. Number 5 is the sweat glands. So they call it the pseudophorus gland, but it's a sweat gland. Letter 6 is showing the epidermis, 7 is showing the dermis, and then 8 is showing the hypodermis with all of the fatty tissue on there. Looking specifically at the parts of the hair, I'm looking at your hair shaft. So the shaft again is going to be all of that you can see above the surface. Down in here is the hair bulb, which is at the very bottom, and down at the very, very tip of the hair bulb is the papilla, and this is going to be where your hair growth is going to occur. There's a sebaceous gland that again enters into that hair follicle. The hair root is anything below the surface, so here's the epidermis, that's the surface there. And then if you're looking specifically at your shaft, your hair shaft can be divided into 3 parts. There is the outer part, which is called the cuticle. It's a scale-like structure. Then there's an inner part called the cortex, and then sometimes, not all the time, but in some hair cells there's a line or structure that lines right down the middle of the cortex, which is called the medulla. And this can be used to identify, used to compare hair samples, like if hair is found at a crime scene. The medullas have different shapes to them, so they can be one continuous line, they can be like dashed lines, they can be dotted lines, and so some people have a medulla and some people don't have a medulla, but you can easily see these under a microscope. So the outer layer is the scale-like part, the cortex is kind of the inner layer, and then that way middle layer that may or may not be there is called the medulla. Again, you can kind of see here is a micrograph showing that hair follicle. So here's the hair papilla. Again, that's going to be where the cells are made to make new hair cells. And then it'll push that up, and that's what makes the shaft grow longer as it comes back out. You can see the root of the hair and the hair follicle, which is going to be the structure that holds the entire root of the hair. And so eventually this root of the hair will come up out of the surface, and then it's referred to as the hair shaft. Here's another micrograph, again showing you the hair follicle and then also showing you a sebaceous gland and how it sits right next to that hair follicle. So when it produces that oily substance, it actually comes out the hair follicle to the surface. So that's why sometimes your hair gets oily. And then you can see down here some different sweat glands. Here's another really good picture showing you that hair, and actually this should say the hair follicle, not the hair shaft, but then this sebaceous gland that you can see dumping right into that hair follicle. All right, so we've talked about skin and we talked about hair. So then the next part of the integumentary system is going to be the structure of your nails. So if you kind of look at your nails, hopefully you kind of maybe just draw it out and kind of see the different structures as we follow along. But when you look at your nail, the visible part of the nail that you can see is called the nail plate. And the nail plate is made up of the main part, which is the plate, and then the free edge, which is going to be the part of the nail plate that extends over the fingertip. Now, underneath, if we were to peel this nail plate off, there's going to be a couple different regions here. The main area behind the nail plate is called the nail bed. Then on that nail plate, you have the lunula, which is going to be that half moon structure. The lunula is going to be where the nail bed then meets the matrix, which is going to be located underneath your skin below your cuticle here on the nail structure. The matrix is the only living part of the cell or of the nail. This is going to be where cell division takes place, producing more nail cells that eventually push the nail upward, giving you longer fingernails. So the matrix sits, like I said, right below this skin here, which is called the mantle. And then the boundary between kind of that matrix and that the matrix and the nail bed is called the cuticle. And the cuticle has an important function because it's going to protect the matrix from being invaded by bacteria and also protects it from physical damage. So because these cells are growing and reproducing really quickly, we want to be able to protect them, and that is the job of your cuticle. So you can see that little flap of skin here. That's going to be your cuticle. Next, we have the sides of the nail. So the sides of the nail are going to include the nail groove and the nail wall. The nail grooves are the grooves on the skin at the sides of the free edge, and the nail actually follows these grooves as a guideline of where it's going to grow. So these are often called the lateral grooves too. And then the nail wall just refers to the skin on both sides of those lateral grooves. And then last is going to be the hyponychium, is going to be the skin line where the nail plate separates from the nail bed. So this is going to be this line right here. That's going to be an uppermost line. That's again going to be that division between the nail plate and the nail bed. So that gap in between. So those are the different parts of your edge. So the free edge, the nail plate, and the lunula, you can all see. Underneath then would be the hyponychium, the nail bed, going down to the matrix where active cell division is taking place. Some of the other outer protective structures or guidelines will include the nail groove or the lateral groove, the nail wall, which is the skin on either side, the cuticle, which is like that posterior boundary there, it helps protect, and then the mantle is going to be the skin that is below the nail that covers up that matrix. Those are the different structures that are involved in your integumentary system. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.